then you guys would say, fantastic, terrific, great, all day long. So, are you guys ready to do this chant with me? Okay, sounds good. Everyone stand up, let's stand up. Okay? So, all youth funders, how y'all feeling? Fantastic, terrific, great, all day long. I think you guys can do a little bit better than that, right? Okay, one more time. All youth funders, how y'all feeling? Fantastic, terrific, great, all day long. Thank you, everybody.
Hi everybody, I'm Jesus. I go he, him, his from Inner City Struggle. So my experience with camp, I went 2 years in a row as a youth camper, and like those 2 years, it totally changed my life, because back then I wouldn't be doing this type of work, actually because of Sons and Brothers and me going to the camp. I stopped doing what I do, which is like just be in the streets right after school, or even during school. I wouldn't be in school. I would be just with friends, hanging out, doing bad stuff, you know. So camp and Sons and Brothers totally changed that. They gave me the opportunity that no one else ever gave me. So, and this year I went as a mentor, as a youth facilitator, which is something I wanted to do. I kept on bugging my mentor, like, oh, I want to go as a youth facilitator, as a mentor. And so it finally came true. So that's definitely a big step in my life. It gave me the opportunity to express myself, and yeah, that's me.
What's up, y'all? I'm David Celedon. He, him, his with Resilience Orange County.
My name is Carla, pronoun she, her, hers, and I come from the East Los Angeles Women's Center. And I would have never pictured to be myself where I am today if it wouldn't have been for Sisterhood Rising. I went 3 times, and this year I had the opportunity to be on the planning team, which I feel is a big step, because it's like you're on the table with the planning team and you're breaking bread essentially, right, where you're saying, you're giving your input on what you would like for the camp to look like. And I feel like that would have never happened if I didn't go to Sisterhood Rising my first year and broken out of the shell that I was once in. And I definitely would have to thank Sisterhood Rising for giving me that space and giving me the opportunity to break and become this amazing leader that I now am in my community. So definitely I would recommend Sisterhood Rising to everybody, to all my friends, because it's amazing coming from LA, going up north to this space where there's actually nature, right, not what we have here. But definitely I do recommend it, and I do love it. It has changed my life and has impacted me to this day now. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Rosanna Ram, she, her, hers. I'm from Long Beach, and I'm from the organization Kamaigas in Action. Yeah. And for me, Sisterhood Rising is really special. I was able to go this year, would be my 2nd year, and I had the opportunity to go with my little sister. And honestly, being in Sisterhood Rising, I don't think I would be able to speak as proudly as I can right now. So I'd like to thank Sisterhood Rising. And also, I think I discovered my true self. I was able to be someone who supported others rather than someone supporting me, because I was able to grow into such a strong leader. And I was able to build stronger relationships with a lot of people from different sites, and a lot of people, and also my little sister and my family, yeah.
Hi everybody, my name is Timothy once again, from Khmer Girls in Action from Long Beach. Pronouns he, him, and his. So, I've been doing this work for about 4 years now, but the early stages, about like the first year, I wasn't really involved. So once I had went to the Figure Out Dreams conference in Sacramento at the Capitol, that really it engaged and lighted my potential. So after going to the conference and going to the Sons and Brothers camp, it really allowed me to be like my fully self. The first year I went to the Sons and Brothers camp, I was like really shy, didn't really do as much, but when this year came up and had the opportunity to be part of the youth facilitation team, I really enjoyed it. It was like one of my best years. Being involved like the logistics of the agenda and being able to provide and support for the young people was like one of the key things that I love doing. Thank you.
Great. With that being said, we're going to do a quick activity that we adapted from Sisterhood Rising, and we really relate and we really resonate with this activity just because we can see where everybody stands and we can see that we do share some similar backgrounds and we do share some similar interests. So just to keep in mind that this is a quiet activity, so we're going to be reading off a bunch of statements that relate with youth leadership and youth organizing, but it's all starting with your own experience as a young person when you were a younger person. So if the statement we read applies to you, then please stand up, but if you are incapable of standing up, then just raise your hand. So David's going to start us off with the first statement.
Alright, so stand up or raise your hand if you had a support system around you when you were a young person. Repeat that again. Stand up or raise your hand if you had a support system around you when you were a young person.
Okay, thank you. Take a seat. We're going to get you moving up and down, so gotta get some exercise there. Stand up or raise your hand if you had people that invested in your growth and development as a young person. Right, thank you. Then we'll take the last one back there.
All of the questions I stood up because of family. It wasn't so much. The last question about as an adult, if I feel like I have a safe space, like not a woman of color, as a Chicana, like it's really it's tough, but looking towards yourself, like
right. Thank you. Yeah, it just makes you start to think. On to the last few questions that we should be more youth-led and youth.
To make a greater investment. Thank you. Sit down.
We have 4 tables about any reflections or thoughts that you had in these things.
Reflection to this is that, like a lot of communities don't have organizations and people to look after themselves, you know what I mean? And like have the help and just go somewhere to ask, like, because they feel like it's demeaning them. And I feel like more of these situations will have people feel comfortable with themselves to ask for help and go for help. Because a lot of people don't get to have it and get the opportunity to do the things they want to do in love. That's really it.
Can you get your name and comment?
My name's Todd. William, I don't know.
Anybody else? Come on, don't be shy.
So I'm going to ask everyone to stand up and link arms with each other.
I'm going to state the first statement, and because when we do this one, we're calling in all of our ancestors, we're calling up all the people. When you're doing this, just keep that in the back of your mind and call it. Okay, so y'all ready? I'm saying literally, it's a repeat. It is our duty to fight each other.
We must love and support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our
duty to fight.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love and support each other.
We must love and support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Okay, this is the last one. Let's call in all of our ancestors and let's do it strong. It is our duty to fight. Having us here.
please join me again in thanking our opening speakers this morning. As we began planning this event, one of the things that was really important to us was that we wanted this event to be grounded. Primary goals for today is to make sure this work. And that, so again, excited to have you all with us here on Facebook, so there are with us. We also have the hashtags listed up here. Youth in Action CA. So if you do want to tweet, if you want to tweet and share this, and we have the Twitter handles for FCYO and the California Endowment up there as well too. So please share with your friends and your peers the things that you're learning and hearing as we have these conversations. So I know that you got to have some conversations at your tables before, but I don't know how much folks actually got to really introduce yourselves to each other. It's one of the that organizing and the work that we do in philanthropy is all based in relation to know each other at our tables, and we'll continue to mix up and have people get to know different people throughout the day in that way. So I wanted to start out with some conversations at the tables. And if you can start by, we'll take about 5 minutes now at your tables to have everybody go around and first just share your name and your organization and where you're from. We want to hear what brings you here. You decided on this day in August out of your busy schedule to make a priority to be here. What brought you here? What made you decide to come? What is it that you're hoping to get out of the day today? What are you hoping to learn to support your work? And then for those of you that were part of our conversation last night at Mendez High School, any reflections that you have from last night? What was most interesting to you? What did you learn? What did you hear that stayed with you? So let's take about 5 minutes at your tables, introduce yourselves to each other, and reflect on these questions. Then we'll come back in just a minute.
With adding this, and I thought last night was really great. Really interesting to learn about the history, and where we are, and really good. And a lot of organizing, powerful.
But I was also really struck by the
our organizations work a lot together. You guys fund this in California? We fund Southern California. So it's like 6 counties from the Santa Barbara, Ventura area down to
a lot of times it's funded.
Organizing is a new so the organization signs to us and they look at okay. And so we do sign like I think we want to be a little bit more intentional what gaps we fill, whether they need and youth organizing is one of the main ones. Yeah, we have youth organizing programs and so youth organizing is constant, but we really are because we really feel that and we have a program. So, yeah, we fund every organization. about 7 years and I'm like, oh wow, okay. We've been to places like Colorado. You know, our borders always been like, why are we really here? Because we're like, really good food. Exemplary but we are, and we actually put on kind of organism with organizing.
You take about 1 minute to finish up.
As well. Yeah, I mean, well, you know, I think SQIO is definitely a go-to place and
I mean, there'll be a lot of resources presented today, such as hopefully I've been working a lot on developing either some of the research or some of the framing that we might need in philosophy and make the argument to help do that. Is that something that, like, this is a piece of that?
Honestly speaking,
that's to make the case that basically there was a talk in youth development in organizing like that to
that presented to our board, and I think that was the key actually, because we knew it was youth organizing and the policy organizing things, but it was the youth development things that really still feel
Is that what you were speaking to? What are some of the, I don't know, the outstanding questions or are there any sort of hesitations still or question marks that
Okay, if you can wrap up with your final thoughts, come back. Evaluate and fund the way that they support the development of individual young people. Last year, that can be shared with the field as a whole. Next, our funder base of funders who are committed to this through our field scans and through our new online landscape map. We also organize funder learning sessions. Finally, we also have organizing networks that works to ensure that young men of color themselves. A little bit about a background about FCY.
So before we get into the goals for the day, I wanted to talk a little bit about what our funder advocacy program is like and what our funder who in here funds nationally. Who's traveled here from another state to California? Briefing series, which takes a look at the context of youth organizing. And events in this series are designed to bring together different parts of the regional funding, learn about trends and incubate opportunities and sharing an endowment. And we'll have a particular focus on California, which has including the endowment. So we invite you to, as Eric said, in my home, November 15th through the 16th will be, 15th will be. The exciting part about that one is there'll be some overlap. So there'll be some fundraising convening that will have over 300 young people that love New Mexico and share learnings with the history of organizing and resilience in New Mexico and in the Southwest region. So please mark your calendars for that date. Next, we want to jump into reviewing our goals for the day. So you all have agendas in your packet. First, we want to learn about the history of organizing in California and build a deeper understanding of the California Endowment's 10-year initiative, Building Healthy Communities. Of course, with a particular focus on the strategy of investing in youth organizing from across the state. Next, we want to explore the most recent research findings on the outcomes of youth organizing relating to academic achievement, college access, social and emotional learning, and civic engagement. And of course, we want to learn about key campaigns from youth organizers from across the state. So they'll be able to share their stories again later on this afternoon, their work, their wins, and their challenges. And then, you know, as always, when we build up these sessions, a quick as Eric said, is building relationships. So we want you all to engage in dialogue with each other, to build. So, you know, there was a lot of work put into this, and we'd like you to get to know our work a little bit more and how we're building a more powerful, sustainable, and interconnected field. A few of the key questions: and strategically build capacity where it's nascent. What does the research tell us about how youth organizing supports holistic youth development and long-term community leadership? And how can funders help community build capacity and infrastructure to in turn ensure long-term sustainability? So you're going to be seeing this slide a lot today. We think it's important. It progresses. So this is what we know, right? We know that youth are one of the largest and fastest growing and increasingly diverse populations in the United States today. And in this moment, given the current immigration policy, political landscape, disinvestment from quality public education, and strong community infrastructure, along with the increased fast track to poverty, unemployment, and incarceration, investing in Good. Well, youth organizing groups are winning significant policy victories and transforming the lives of tens of thousands for all the wins that they're gaining. At FCYO, we believe we must shift the paradigm in this country. We must shift it from one that sees young people as deficits to one that engages them in organizing, gives them voice and power. So moving from deficit to power is best achieved by the recognition that supporting young people's holistic development through youth organizing is a two-for development of young people. Is a two-for-one win. That when you invest in the individual leadership of a young person, you're not only their own individual leadership, community change. They then in turn Eric, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper.
We thought it was important to look at the history of youth organizing in California. It's important to ground this in the context of how was that infrastructure built over time. So for the last 20 years, Luis has dedicated himself to building a movement for social and economic, many of us were last night, and currently serves as a senior fellow for the movement strategies in California. He's also the founder of Wireless and Voter Engagement Effort. So with that, I will turn it over to Luis.
Okay, bear with me. Today's my first day back from sabbatical. I'm actually still my sabbatical after I leave today. I have 4 more days left. So bear with me. It's my first presentation. I've been with a 5 and a 7-year-old for the last 5 weeks, having fun with them. So I guess that's a good segue into this, right? Because partly we're trying to build a better world for folks like my kids at home, right? And so, you know, I have to do the history of youth organizing in California in less than 15 minutes. But you know, I think it's a very interesting thing, right? So I think one of the things I want to start with is I want everyone to close their eyes. I want everyone to close their eyes. Because I'd be remiss to talk about the history of California without kind of mentioning a little bit of my own experience, right? You know, like 25 years ago, my city burned to the ground in April of 1992. I was a 17-year-old in my senior year in high school, and I saw, you know, most of my city burned to the ground, and for 2 to 3 weeks, I was at home. California was a very different place than we see it today. You know, now people are talking about California as the resistance of California. It was a very, very different place. You know, you're still in the center of the biggest jailer in the world. You know, anti-immigration policy started here in California, and in particular in Southern California, with the rise of the Minutemen movement here in Southern California. You know, Prop 187, 184, the Anti-Immigrant Initiative, and the 3 Strikes You're Outlaw, which eventually got exported to the rest of the United States, started here in California. The reality that we live in today. So for me, I want you to imagine, because that's the place. It began really with us being, what I always say, the laboratory for the anti-immigrant, anti-people of color legislation and work that we anti-everything, you know. It was not that far ago that the anti-immigrant hysteria and the prison boom, even in this current moment of us scaling back prison building and folks in the system, or in a California jail. But the reality is, this also spawned a generation of activists that produced the movement, right? There's always a saying is that, you know, demographics is not destiny. And that was the case here in California. Even though the numbers were changing and we were slowly becoming the most diverse state in the union, the reality is that wouldn't have happened without organizing, leadership development, and a whole generation really getting in and really moving this kind of work, right? You know, as we see organizations today, if you look across the state, from groups like yesterday, I know folks that were in the room, like Khmer Girls in Action, Youth Justice Coalition, Inner City Leaders. Or if you look across the state, from Fathers and Families that's here with us today, to groups in the Bay Area like Chinese Progressive Association, a lot of the folks who these organizations began in youth organizing. And that's a narrative that's important for us to know. As the Chinese Progressive Association, he emerged out of the fights against 184, 187, and Prop 21, doing work in San Diego, and before he went back to the Bay Area. If you talk about Maria Brennan, emerged out of the anti-187 generation, organizing, and who's now running Inner City Stroke. We look at Alberto. And so the reality is if we do it right, you not only are going to build a movement for young people in the now, but you're really building a movement for the long-term investment of building organizations that initially, when we were talking about, and you know, where I was talking about here, there we go. So I'm gonna go through this quick little thing because it's kind of fast, right? So it's kind of like the last, you know, 23 to 25 years, right? And so the seeds of the movement in '94, right? I mentioned 5 to 35. I don't think we got 35%. Yes, and then 184 passed in the same token, right? In the late 60s, and then yes, and so partly the reality is, in the same year, 1994, we passed 3 strikes around anti-immigrant legislation in that year, and the state governor named the governorship of the state, right? Very similar to what we're seeing now, right? And like a lot of people are saying, is the nation is suffering what we suffered 20 years ago, right? Today is the 187 moment of what we went through in California 20 plus years ago. But in many ways, that moment really galvanized, for me, I say this was like the emerging of Latinos and immigrants in California as a political force, right? But what I always like to say, this for me, this in many ways is also a passing of a torch, because African American leadership played a critical role in training, or folks who emerged out of the African American struggle, played a Karen Bass, Elizabeth Martinez, who was an organizer for SNCC, Bob Wing, you know, so all these sets of older generation of activists, so that it wasn't just about being against something, but really trying to build something new, something that had never been seen before. So that's a critical element, because as we see organizing both nationally, but here in California, is that at its essence, it was intersectional, it was multiracial, and it was about building a powerful movement that led no one behind. And in particular, it built this whole generation of folks. I mentioned just a few of them, but if you talk about folks in the cultural arts, in organizing, in social justice, and labor, a lot of people came out of this moment. It was a moment where everybody looked around and felt this was not the California I wanted to grow up in. Fast forward to the next kind of like critical moment in the youth organizing field here in California. It was the passage of Prop 21. And passage of Prop 21 was an anti-youth, kind of like all money for youth imprisonment, nothing for rehabilitation or youth programs. It passed in similar numbers. Prop 21 could easily have passed, but a movement was struck, and partly is this whole generation of folks who had been trained and galvanized around Prop 184 and 187 were now in their mid to late 20s, right? And a lot of them played a critical role in building this generation, and that moment also played in the state of California, right? So you're talking about for 30 million people at the time. But Prop 21, after Prop 21, about 15 new organizations emerged throughout the state, either organizations, networks, or coalitions, be it the Skills Coalition, Escuelas y Espinas No in the Central Valley, you know, around state, groups that did not exist, really hunkered down and built a whole new movement across the state. And particularly this was critical because this actually is kind of like a connection to what had happened in 187, is that what happened in 187 wasn't just about fighting around this kind of like container, which was just about being against anti-immigration policy, but it was really about building a movement which was about racial justice and social and economic justice in this country. So the 21 is that folks who had fought around 187 are the folks who played a critical role in building the leadership and the organization expense of building this humongous prison system in California. And at that time, you know, the numbers have been thrown around. You had about 21 new state prisons built in California, but only one UC. And actually, very cheap system to almost a private system in that time frame. Now you have to pay, you know, $1,000. The system was free, right? You know, so that was a critical year. New organizations emerged across the state with the racial justice lens, particularly around schools, not jails, both around educational equity and finding mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex. Ideas that we're talking about now, making major reforms around there, but these said we have to take a stand, and the time is now. You know, fast forward in 2005. 2005 was a really critical year because you actually had, this is when the pivot began. For a long time, we were fighting against stuff, right? We're fighting against stuff. I always said we had fun winning really bad, right? And we was, like, it built a whole big wins in California to defeat something and invest those dollars in rehabilitation services for young people, right? And it really showed us the ability that we could finally win, even in times where you're building all these prisons. That one jewel that we could win showed us. In 2005, one of the largest victories, and because, for example, like one of the largest youth organized infrastructures I would say around the country exists, has really been built here in Los Angeles. You saw that probably yesterday in that tour and really a lot of those organizations. But some of the organizations then, they fought to move the district for this college prep for all. And really it wasn't just a college prep for all, but it was really an inner city struggle. Had kind of began this public education campaign because schools that were the largest schools in the country, Roosevelt High School in East LA right here down the street, Boyle Heights, Fremont High in South LA, Belmont High in Mid-City, Pico Union area, had over 5,000, almost 500,000 students. And they were the largest schools in the country. And they would start with the best, right? And of those that walked the stage, less than 50 were actually college eligible, right? Could even go to a UC or Cal State system. You know, you had a school just down the street, actually just down the street, less than a mile away, Lincoln High School, where a school of 3,000 kids at the time, where in a 3-year period, not one Latino student went to a UC. Wow. And so that was and these groups came together and built a larger educational justice coalition here in Los Angeles to fight college prep for all, and to really begin the campaign of figuring out how we save and stop the disappeared. That really in many ways not only started the movement for college prep, that actually spread like wildfire across the state, districts across the state, began implementing this stuff through organizing that was happening in districts from Oakland to Fresno to San Francisco, and it started here and it kind of spread as wildfire. And in particular, it started really also in many ways the fight to stop the school to prison pipeline, particularly that our kids stay in school. And that's why in many ways, LUSD became the first school that actually eliminated willful defiant suspensions for all in the country before anywhere else, right? Because it actually started here. It was a fight for the disappeared, and groups that, like Community Coalition, Inner City Struggle, YJC, Cadre, parent organizing groups really took that fight to bear and have been fighting that at the school district for many years. But really, 2013 was a very critical time because for a long time, and I would say from like 2005, really from Prop 21, there had been Schools Not Jail statewide coalition, the Campaign for Quality Education spearheaded by Californians for Justice, have been fighting to build an equity funding system in California. As we know, since the passage of Prop 13, which really undercut funding for public schools here in California, in particular, the folks that were hit the most were schools in low-income areas where most people of color resided all around California. And so for years, we had been trying to fight for both more funding in education as well as an equity-based system. And in 2013, after both the passage of CALS, which is a statewide civic engagement network, and Mobilize the Immigrant Vote, and other key organizations like PICO, but a lot of those groups were actually, that were part of these groups were actually youth organizing groups that helped spearhead that. And as an outcome of that is we finally had the dollars to create the LCFF system, and the organizing that had been building for almost a decade in many ways came to a head, and we were successful in passing LCFF. And for us, it was probably the biggest victory in many ways to that point for youth organizing in California. It was the most progressive funding formula implemented in the state in almost 30 years. And overnight, thousands of, millions of dollars, really millions of dollars came to low-income schools, right? Schools that were being funded. As you all know, we were 47th in funding in the state of California. At that time, we were only funding schools like in low-income neighborhoods at about $8,000 per student. And because of this, for schools just down the street in South LA, East LA, or in any low-income area across the state. And it was a major victory. And in many ways, it also became a really organizing vehicle for us. That doesn't mean it was always going to go for the stuff we wanted to. So groups in this room, groups across the state were trying to fund for restorative justice programs, college prep programs, making sure that the dollars went to the kids with the most need, which was the intent of LCFF. But it became a major victory for us and has really been a guiding vehicle for us for the last couple of years to make sure that those dollars go to the programs to invest in young people. And to really building institutions and really harnessing and building power across the state is just this last year, we built a network, now over 20 to 25 organizations across the state called Why Vote. And it was really a network of all the youth organizing groups, and most of them are actually not part of a state civic engagement network. And in 20 funding formulas and against the prison industrial complex, there was stuff that's not seen as much as organizations are critical, but also the investment in both the young leaders that lead these organizations, become leaders of these organizations. There's people now in the labor movement who have come out of this work, who are leading organizations, who are in philanthropy, that are playing a critical role. And I think partly it's the reason I think in certain states as demographic shifts happen. The reason, I came out of this work. I started as a 17-year-old doing youth organizing here in Los Angeles. Went to school in the Bay Area where I continuously struggled. And the important part was that I saw myself is as you see these demographic shifts in many particular ways, that Latinos in particular and immigrants play a critical role about the future of this nation, right? And I think what I learned from my mentors is that are we going to allow Latinos to be the wedge group, or are we going to allow Latinos to be the racial justice? Mentors is that if we really want to build the diverse California, the diverse United States that we want to build, that Latinos and immigrants in California and in the United States, right? And that's why as you think of places like Nevada, the Southwest, Texas, this is where I think this model really transfers itself in many ways. North Carolina, place from the South to the West, to the Southwest, to the Midwest, is that we were the state that was fighting the stuff you all were fighting now, in many ways. And we were able to move, but not based on it's just going to happen and our demographics going to shift everything, but there was investment, there was organizations built, and in time we were able to flip the narrative here in California, and we're far from where we need to be, but we're moving in the right trajectory, and we're going to move faster and much faster sooner than later. And partly that's the California story that we hope to impart on a lot of you here today, and as we move and you begin to fund both here in the state but also throughout the United States.
How long do you plan on to do this?
It's kind of crazy. Time flies, right? I'm closer to 60 now. For a long time, it was my first initial purpose was growing up on the east side, right? I grew up down the street, right? I'm an east side kid, right? Growing up with what I grew up with. I was the only one of my friends that went to college, right? Mustache graduate. So that was my purpose initially, right? I wanted to build something different in my neighborhood. I didn't want to just leave my neighborhood. I wanted to come back, build something new. That was my purpose for the first change in my life. But now my purpose in many ways, they grew up,
Thank you so much for what resonated with me was the importance of building with our brothers and sisters, specifically with the Black community who has been. I think that that's super important and not said enough. I was thinking about as we did the write-up about discrimination within our own communities. We saw blackface in a Latino community in a neighborhood. So how do we talk about these things in a way that really shows that we're all affected by interpersonal race relations, and that the colonizer really did his work in really dividing and conquering, and how do we, kind of move forward and progress and help inform others about the importance of really, coming together, uniting, but also the history of Blackness in the world.
Well, I think initially, I think it begins with learning that the history of social justice and resilience in this country starts with the Black experience, right? And that's critical. Like any organization that does social justice work, if you don't start with that, you're giving a misservice to not only that organization, but the person you're building. And so, I still remember my initial, I didn't know I was going to do this work, right? But I still remember I had a teacher show me eyes on the, and I still remember how powerful that was. But in particular, that was the way I understood my own experience, right? So I still remember, I wasn't able to articulate what my family was going through here in Los Angeles, right? But when I saw that film, one is wow, people could fight against it, and secondly, there's people, right? But also with our, we're organizing parents and adults, right? This organization, they organize primarily African American, Black and brown, but their leadership historically has been African American, right? Are so close. Constantly, you have to be kind of race and how the experience here in the U.S. And how groups get racialized and different between Black and brown communities, right? Affirmative action is an issue between African Americans and think about it and a way of dealing with it. Then it's going to explode. It will explode and we won't be able to come together. That stuff like this would have never happened. Groups would have led with that. But that's hard work. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's
movements. What is Movement Strategy Center or any of the partners you're working $1 billion a year specifically for youth organizations rallying around how to make sure that we get that money and make sure that it's just systems that are causing more harm than good?
I work closely with fathers and families. We're part of Right Places. Mark, who I work closely with the Alliance for Boys Men of Color. The important thing is really making sure that as you think about rapid response dollars that we want, but easily it could also be sent to the prison industrial complex, right? That was the begin to pay for school police to Los Angeles. We know in the long term, this room is making sure that we think about route we would have ever 20 years ago, but at the same token, we have to.
During the fights against 187.
As a former public school teacher,
a funder conversation. Are sort of the manifestations of a lot of clearly as it bumps up against the. If we were to more about how we should be development and organizing work that is clearly in the C3 space.
C4 infrastructure, C3 infrastructure, and even other stuff out there. And so I think the groups that you work with, as you, the civic engagement work or other work, groups like Mobilize Immigrant Vote, California Call, or even YVote Now, are now passed through. So they, and then other groups who have been more established have now built their own C4s, so they completely separate their current limits to do. Nobody was around to really train us. And I think partly as funders, we need to think about options on the front end. So instead of them making a major mistake 10 years down the line that could actually impact. I think partly, it's not being fearful of what we're funding, but really thinking about we really want to fund this. Once we get that, and it allows other organizations to maybe be more fearful, right? So I think about even in California, the work that got funded in even 2005, most funders were not funding, right? California Endowment was not funding the way they're funding now. They've moved, right? So I just think it just takes a couple funders willing to take that risk, but it comes, and then from there groups will move, right? There's more funding going into social justice and organizing advocacy in California than ever before. I remember when I was doing youth organizing in 2000, when I wrote my grants, except for FCYO, they actually gave me my first grant. We were the smallest of the grant they gave out. They were our first grant. And I remember every other grant I wrote, we were a college prep program. We were a youth development program. We were an after school program, right? Which we were. Yes, and you also play that role when you're youth organizing group. We know that. But that was the only way you could fund your organizing work, right? There's much more organizations now that not only they want to fund organizing, but they even have a racial and equity lens, which is pretty amazing. But there's still there's still some struggles. There's still some areas around that we need to work through. But I think most important thing is as we have more and more emerging groups than ever before, I think partly is how do we support them and asking those tough questions on the early end, give them the support necessary. How do we kind of pool resources together so that maybe there's a legal support for 4 or 5 organizations, because we know that a young organization cannot afford a lawyer to ask all the questions to make sure we're not, violating any rules. So I know, like as WIGO, that's what we've done. We have a lawyer. We have all these resources that we allow, that we give access to our 20+ organizations as they're doing civic engagement work.
Yeah. So, Luis, I appreciate your sharing of the story around California and youth organizing.
Yeah.
You know, just to add a little bit more into it is, we can't really forget around the areas that are really high in agriculture, rural areas. We have the United Farm Workers. A lot of us, me in particular, I grew up in the United Farm Worker movement. Learned from my dad, learned from some of the elders, and incorporating that into youth organizing, which has been very successful in areas like, Central Coast, Central Valley. Labor, and actually, the things that are happening with immigration, so even areas like Coachella and things like that. So we want to bring it up to the forefront and shed some light on that. That's been some of the struggles that have been carried on even before 1994 with youth organizing. So
and I would add, Central Valley, Central Coast. This used to Central Coast, more Central Valley areas like the Coachella, which is more East County and San Joaquin. Those are places that we really need to invest. That's infrastructure. There's a lot of emerging groups there, but one of the untold stories of youth organizing is for every 2 or 3 groups that was successful, there was probably 3 groups that did not survive. And a lot of them actually were those groups that emerged that didn't survive. A lot of them in the Central Valley County and the Bay Area right now, right? And how do we think critically about making sure that how do we in the next 3 to 5 years invest dollars in the places where we need it the most? In particular, where most of our families are actually fleeing to in many ways because they can't afford to live in these areas as well, right? So it's both strategic, but it's necessary and it's moral in many ways, right? About investing in these places. So.
Let's give it up one more time for Luis. I've had the honor and a few times hearing him talk about the history of organizing here, his own story of youth organizing, and each time I learned something new. Who learned something about California and what he just said? Right? Those stories, those histories are so important, in particular for us to understand the strategies and lessons we can continue to learn and grow in our own funding strategy. So I definitely heard a few things like, we remember when organizing, youth organizing, social justice organizing wasn't funded. I was a youth organizer. I come out of organizing. I come out of a very similar history in the Southwest. So it only takes a couple of us to jump in and move new and innovative and exciting strategies. So as our data support young people. So as we transition to the next panel, I wanted to just give a quick update to our agenda. So I know many of you this morning, and he sends his apologies, but not to worry. We have a whole team of folks from the California as a wonderful way. And so with that, I have the pleasure of introducing Albert Maldonado. As a youth program manager, he doesn't want me to do this, I know, but I'm going to do it anyways. As the youth program manager and leverage youth organizing and power building efforts across local and statewide building healthy communities campaigns. Albert has spearheaded the development of several annual signature statewide youth organizing gatherings, including youth organizing camps. We heard from some young people this morning and how impactful that work is with them. Youth Advocacy Day in Sacramento. Albert is also on the FCYO board and part of why we're here today, and somebody I truly admire. So help me in welcoming Albert.
Albert, and I'm certainly not Dr. Ross. So I'm the pinch hitter. And Dr. Ross really does send his regards. He actually was called into jury duty, and we were hoping last morning. So on that note, I think before I jump in, I just want to give a little bit of context, but more importantly, some thanks and appreciations. So before I tell you what I'm going to talk about and start talking about that, I just want to give some deep appreciation. So Many of the folks that helped to bring this together and that have really contributed to our strategy are in this room. So big thank you to Cherie Tang and the other folks, you know, that have contributed to today. So there's a number of people that pick a quick moment, and Mona and everybody. I want to kind of build on what Luis said. We almost have to acknowledge, and there's a lot of folks in this room that have been at this work for a long time, and there's some new folks to the room as well, and some folks that, you know, are really sharp on philanthropic strategies. But I think the youth organizing field, like, we have to call out that it's growing up, right? We were talking about this last night, but there's I don't know the word. We were talking about its grown-upness, if that means. Now struggling with, you know, these notions around sustainability, right? Like infrastructure, organizational development, HR, like all of these things are real issues. I'm gonna, you know, kind of lift the hood on our strategy and kind of talk, you know, I'm gonna invite my colleagues up here in a little bit. So we'll hear from Virginia Mosqueda from the Irvine Foundation, you know, we'll hear from Margarita Luna, who is our Coachella program manager, and incubated, you know, really important opportunities for young people and community members to exercise, you know, their power, their voice, their leadership. And then lastly, we'll also hear from Mary talking about and thinking about how do we take, you know, an idea and kind of an emerging strategy, you know, from a philanthropic perspective and bake it. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and welcome, you know, I mean, first of all, welcome you to our building, but really contextualize the work. You know, really for us, youth leadership is one of our core drivers of change. And for those of you that were, you know, in the space last night, you know, my colleague and our director for South Building Healthy Communities really pointed out, and I want to bring to this space, this idea that we're relatively new. We are new at investing in young people, as change makers, but we've seen some incredible, you know, gains in our investment, and it really has kind of allowed us to kind of take a step back and say, where does this work kind of fit into our organizational DNA? And I want to call out, you know, and I know that there's a lot of words in here. I'm not asking anybody to read these words, but on your table, if you're so interested, you can. We really, you know, talk about, you know, kind of empowering those that have been historically excluded, right? And I think we've heard some of our young people use language like those most impacted, those most affected, and those are also the folks that have largely been left out of decision-making circles, opportunities to kind of weigh in. And so we think it's important to build capacity. We think it's important to really lift up the voices of folks impacted, but one of the most important things, and again, we heard this yesterday, this idea around practice, and Veronica Deniquez this afternoon will get deeper into that, but the idea of leadership development and opportunities for young people to kind of build their skills is through practice, right? And it would be, you know, we talk about safe space, and young people are real, just as they were real with us this morning, and just as they've been real with us last night. They'll tell us what's on their mind. So it's really working with young people to help them understand what is going on in your neighborhood. And it's in that process, right? It's also about schools. What's going on in your schools? Is there a healthy school climate to really support, you know, your healthy development in schools? You know, we know that healthy young folks are more likely to learn and succeed and stay on course. And in the same, you know, with the prevention system, right? What are all the health systems? What are the systems? Are systems, you know, really systems of opportunity? Or on the other hand, are they really systems of oppression, which a lot of our young people kind of lift up and talk about? So for us, it's ultimately about building leadership that is applied to, you know, bodies of work. When we think about neighborhoods, when we think about schools, when we think about health systems, are those systems meeting the needs of young people? But we're also building up the leadership of young people to understand that those are all democratizing decisions that can be made, right? When we talk about, you know, understanding, you know, where city and public resources are going, are public resources going to healthy things in communities, right? And so one of the things that, you know, I know Dr. Ross isn't here, but he's gone public with the punitive impacts of juvenile justice, right? What we know fundamentally, and I want to call out my colleague in the back of the room, Mary Lou Fulton, who has really led up our Schools Not Prisons work, but it's really about a repositioning of the conversation from, you know, really public investments that really have an impact on young people as opposed to creating those spaces of opportunity. So I just want to kind of contextualize that our work as funders, that the field is growing in terms of, an impact. I want to get into it. The other thing that I want to see in terms of the construct of their community, an explicit, really development, youth organizing space for a long space, from youth services, up to youth organizing. But it was really critical for us to land as an organization and, for communities to have youth services, to have youth development opportunities. We're actually moving public resources to invest in youth, really have to be about power building, really have to be about systems and policy. So I think it's important for us to remember that, in the components, right? So again, this is where, the endowment has been explicit about, we can't fund everybody, we can't fund everything, but we have to be critical about those organizations who are engaged young people in change making, focus areas. The thing that I wanted to really call our level, and we do have, a real intentional focus organizations, right? So in a place like Coachella, where, we kind of stepped in 2010, there were, of course, kind of some areas of opportunity, but really working and thinking through partnership with some of our statewide intermediary organizations, right? So like Movement Strategy Center earlier, they played an important role in really, right? So it's really important for young people to kind of come together, see themselves as part of a bigger whole. And just yesterday, I think we saw some of that playing out, right? We had some of our youth organizers from Oakland connecting with some of our youth organizers from LA, really talking about some of these Prop 46, Prop 64 opportunities that are emerging, and really, kind of folks coming together from Merced when they're talking about transportation issues, right? When we're talking, we heard yesterday about truancy tickets and young people, really getting on the school to prison pipeline, and young people helping to understand, well, hey, transportation may be different, and it may be a rural community versus an urban community, but where we start to see, opportunities to kind of cross-pollinate and leverage each other's efforts, and where there are then opportunities that our youth work really boils down to one critical part, important role. PolicyLink has played an important role to really raise capacity. Along those same idea around healing, right? And so as a foundation, we change. But what our young people reminded us of is, hey, we're real too. And we have to account for a lot of the, really adverse experiences that a lot of our young people have experienced both in their communities, in their schools, that they continue to experience as they navigate their communities, really walking from home or walking from school to home. And I think we saw that play out in Orange County not too long ago, where making sure that young people, kind of have spaces to process those things. I was just at camp, last week and met with some of our young people, and the reality of the moment, right? Like just walking through daily life and in this new climate, there's this spirit of urgency. And I know we always talk about it, and we were kind of reflecting on it earlier. We've kind of been in this moment for a long time, but I think the unique opportunity as young people, as we're continuing to hear, are understanding, what are those leadership opportunities? Where is the city council? Where's the school board at the local level as connected to our movement infrastructure at the statewide level? Along those same lines, we think, of course, it's important to have the boots on the ground, right? You got to have, and so from that perspective, we've also allowing young people to really tell their stories. And so we've, in communities like Coachella, and you'll hear more about this later, that tell their stories and really amplify their voices. And you'll have that LCFF image up there, how young people are, a community college in a rural community. And those are ways in which young people are able to tell their stories and to really kind of move resources in a way that goes, kind of beyond strategy. And be explicit about. I was kind of running through these really quickly in the spirit of getting to the end here. I wanted to spend a moment also talking about data and research. And this is also a way to kind of preview into Veronica Tariquez's session this afternoon at noon. From the very beginning, when we started this work, when we started our youth leadership work, in about 2011, we were explicit about kind of acknowledging that this was new work to us. And so, really from the outset, we engaged Dr. Tariquez, who is and who has been doing some of the most impactful youth organizing research, to really, sit with us and to really devise a way in which we can measure our progress. We, as a health foundation, we needed to understand, is the impact on youth leadership really having. And it's really from that perspective, and I think this was one of those unintended, benefits, really, is that the tool, Veronica's research over the last several years, has been important for us to, substantiate and make health connections, because at the end of the day, we're a health foundation, and we have to be able to measure that. But it's also been a really important tool for us to measure and make adjustments. I think that what is really important for us here is that this is a learning strategy, right? Our youth work is really a learning and iterative process. We're still on the front end of really understanding what it means to engage young people, support healthy youth development opportunities, kind of network folks across the board. But Veronica's research has been really critical to also help us contextualize where we're doing really well and where there are opportunities for growth. And I want to call that out because I think that when Veronica has a chance to dive in a little bit further, I think what you'll hear is kind of backed up by a lot of the stories that we've been hearing from our young people. One, young people want the opportunity to lead. They want the opportunity to really kind of shape the agenda, and they want the opportunity to practice. They understand they might mess up, they might make a mistake, but those are learning opportunities that inevitably allow young people to build that agency, right? That sense of understanding, in terms of how to navigate systems. And one of the things that we learn is that young people that participate in youth organizing really play an important role, or really help to disrupt, right? The opportunity pathway system for them and their colleagues. So young people, really, stay on track. They really report a stronger sense of agency and a stronger sense of resiliency. So I think those are really important pieces that I wanted to lift up, and we will hear more about those in a little bit. And lastly, I just want to say that, sorry, I'm going through this a little bit quickly, folks. I think it's important, that we continue to think about, right? Like, what is the growth, and how do we, continue to think about youth organizing, not just, as was said earlier, a benefit for, our communities, but really how do we meet young people where they are? And I think, one of my charges, that I've really taken seriously at this place is, it's my role to really kind of lift up the voices and to really, kind of represent the views and the urgency of young people, in many ways, as informed by a lot of the things that Luis was talking about earlier. Really creating those opportunities. I too grew up in LA during the uprisings. It was an important moment for us. And it feels like, the more we talk to young people, it's just that moment. They're ready to listen. They're ready to lead. And so on that note, I'm gonna wrap up and invite my colleagues to come up and join. So thank you. So we're going to do some questions here, and in the spirit of that, I'll take a moment to do a little bit of introduction a bit further, and we're actually going to engage in a panel discussion, because I think that what is important here is that I'm simply kind of the person that's standing before you talking about this, but there's been a coordinated and organized effort on our part as an organization. So I'm going to tee this up really quickly, and then I'm going to join my colleagues here. So we're going to hear from Virginia first, and Virginia Mosqueda is a senior program officer with the Irvine Foundation, and was previously with TCE, so I'll claim that as well, and was our Santa Ana program officer. during the time. So I want to, really invite Virginia to kind of share her experience both in Santa Ana, but beyond that, really talking about, her work with Irvine and really the partnership in terms of our work and some of the YVote work that Irvine is actually supporting. And then we'll hear from Margarita Luna, who is our Coachella program manager, who will also talk about incubating work in the Coachella Valley. And also along those lines, she co-leads our Sisterhood Rising work, and we'll talk about the emerging, kind of equity framework around gender, race that permeates kind of our organization. And then lastly, we'll hear from Marion Standish, our VP of Enterprise, who has done a remarkable job of mentoring me and helping me to think about, how do we take an idea and kind of bake it into our philanthropic DNA across the foundation. So on that note, Virginia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Here as a former alum of the TCE family, it doesn't feel like you can really go away. So, and it's such an honor to be on this panel with Marion, Albert, and Margarita, who I have so much respect for just their insights and their passion for kind of equity and inclusion and diversity. So again, thank you for inviting me. I think there was someone who brought up the UFW and organizing. I'm from the Coachella Valley, learned from elders around organizing from the UFW movement, and so I come at this sort of from that frame, and I think of my grant making in that way. So I would say that, my first kind of job out of college was actually organizing young people in Santa Ana, and developed an after-school program and really co-created it with the community. I mean, I had no idea. I was coming out of college. I had no idea what to do and how to engage. So I just asked the community, what is it that you want in an after-school program? During the summer, where kids don't really have any, based it off a National Council de Raza has an after-school program, design curriculum, and really based it on working with young people of all ages, right, from 5-year-old all the way to like college student, to just come together and engage and learn about their community and build the model community that they wanted to see. And that then led to kind of a full-blown program. So I think that I kind of take that experience and having then done policy work at the federal level and then coming back to philanthropy and advocacy, and so the opportunity to be a program manager for the Building Healthy Communities Santana was kind of like full circle for me, having done an after-school program, worked in the community, to come back and kind of a reminder to me of, that not much has changed. Young people were still being targeted. They had the GRIP program where, young people were being incarcerated and they were coming back. And for me, it was just like, what else could I be doing other than delivering an after-school program and really thinking about this work in a more kind of holistic way and really working with community again, asking, what is it that you really want to see? TCE has a very ambitious community plan. What do you want to see? And everybody came back and said, we want to see our young people have greater opportunities. And what does that mean? And they said, well, we want them to be leading this work. And so I basically said, okay, well, how do we do that? And so I started just saying to them, who do you see in your community as leaders? Young people that you see leading work. And so 2 names came up. Abraham Medina, I don't know if you all have met him. He's now the executive director of Resilience OC. And Carlos Perea had been running a kind of passion project, doing youth organizing and youth conferences around decolonization. And really just, kind of in the tradition of like breaking down systems and decolonization. They were training young, like 10, 15 people were coming to this summer program. And then I asked them, how can I support you to grow what you're doing? Because everybody sees this as an innovation. Everybody sees this really culturally rooted in the community and culturally competent. How do I support you? And of course I got denied several times. because they didn't want to be part of the nonprofit industrial complex. This is their words too. So we have to just, you know what I mean? I sort of was like, all right, yes, there is a nonprofit industrial complex, and yes, you have a right to distrust systems, right? By all means, rightly so, because the systems haven't been and have perpetuated inequality in our community. So I actually said that, and they kind of looked back. I said, but what can I do? Like, what is the vision that you want to have for Santana? And they said to me, we want to transform this community. We want this to be led by community for community. And I said, well, how can I help you do that? You know, I kept saying, I want to help. Like, just, you know, I don't want to change who you are. I'm not going to tell you, these are my strategies, these are my outcomes, these are my goals. My job as a program officer is to do my due diligence, right? And my strategy designed around you, right? And what your vision for this work is. And so I made a commitment and a promise that I wouldn't change who they were, but I was going to try to support their work. And so we mutually decided that we would, and you know, they had this organization called Raíz, sponsored organization, who once they kind of got their groove on being kind of a project, they actually in a youth organization, and they're like, no, we outgrown them. They're trying to tell us how to do our work. And I said, all right, well, let's find somewhere else. So we found an intermediary, fiscally sponsored, who said, we'll take an executive director, but again, just really grooming and helping to support and really believing transformation experience that I think I bring to urban. And then how do we support that work rather than us trying to lead with a strategy and grant making goals and outcomes, right? And the board stuff that we have to do, but that's the stuff we need to manage. But I mean, I have to tell you, I was Resilience OC, they told me no, and I kept going back. And I was very persistent. That's the other thing too that we need to be as programs kind of happening in their lives. So we need to respect that, and then strike at the right moment. You know, Abraham, when the camp came, that opportunity came up. I said, "Oh my God, there's this camp. You would be great," because you know they were all doing healing circles. I mean, this is stuff that community's already been doing, right, for a long time. And I said, "There's this camp, and they're training young people." And he told me no because he had he was an undocumented young person, and he had promised the person that he was working with that he was going to work that weekend that the camp was taking place roasting peanuts. And I have to respect that. He gave his word, right, to this person. And so I literally was like, okay, so what do I, like, sort of, I said to myself, what do I do? I said, but you're going to get paid, and like, how about, we figure out an approach with this person? Do you want me to talk to to your boss about, like, this opportunity you have? And he said, no, like, I feel like I need to keep my word. And then I walk away, and I said, okay, well, maybe next year, like, so just put that in mind. And then I walk away, and his mentor is walking up the street, and I said, can you please help me come and talk to this young man about this opportunity, because I really feel like this opportunity is going to be life-changing for him, and I hope in a humbled way, like, I just want to help support him grow into his leadership ability. And so this person went with me, and they finally, I don't know what is a breakthrough, but like he finally said,
yet you persisted.
But yet I persisted. And I think that important for us as Imagine Abraham, being law school now. And so Irvine and in our portfolio, we really felt that there was a gap and a need to address developing kind of a project around that. And I said, well, TCE has a whole young adult organizing kind of loose infrastructure. How do I then support that and have, youth organizing or organizations that do base building, get that to scale? That was a gap that I had seen in our youth organizing helps to do that. And so we actually partner with Movement Strategy, its own network, and that it's training young people to be engaged in disciplinary, multi-year, for them to think outside of the box and be a TA capacity support around this last election and touch base. I mean, those contacted was like 20%, which is unheard of. And tools that they use, I think for us, sort of our new strategy is around kind of working building out that strategy. But again, really, I think are things that I hold true. I think in
We gotta love and support one another. Communities work in the Eastern Coachella Valley. I also manage our portfolio in the Inland Empire. So for me, youth organizing began when BHC began. It was clear that we needed to organize and base build for ultimately the kinds of changes that the community wanted to see in Coachella. And so we started. That was not going to happen. While there is a long history of UFW organizing in Coachella, there was a lot of fatalism that had also set in. There was a lot of folks that were promised never came. And so we faced a lot of fatalism, and it or so are documented power. And so for us, what we really felt as though we own future, but also the pride that they had in their community. Them, whenever they're in the room, they're always talking about their community. And so I think there's, just like there's intergenerational trauma, there's also intergenerational, their grandparents, their parents who were involved in the movement and did see some things that changed, that were improved in the community, and that was passed down. That pride and also that hope for the future was definitely there in their blood. And so for many of them, they saw the conditions that a lot of their parents, and a lot of them actually, were in the field as well, and they really felt as though there just needs to be a better life. There has to be more. And so we really try to harness that by focusing on youth engagement and youth leadership and youth organizing, and really in that kind of succession. We really had to start with youth engagement. And what that looked like was not the way we thought it was going to look like. It started with arts and culture. The youth wanted to counter the Coachella Fest narrative of the community. The community actually never does benefit from Coachella Fest because there's no hotel even afford to go to Coachella Fest. And there's even tickets that are set aside for the community that many of them don't take because they're just way too expensive. And a lot of young people did their own arts and culture festival called The Hue, which is open and free to everyone in the community and the public. And they really focused on local artists, years old, who sang the national anthem in his indigenous language of Yoruba. And so it's really about uplifting, the vibrant sort of culture of the community, and making sure that there were spaces for young people to also tell their truths, tell their stories. There's open mic, and just a celebration of the community. And so it was really through that space and through the planning for the Hue where we saw that we started talking about, politicization and really consciousness raising of what's really happening in their community. And so the first 20 minutes of a meeting would be spent on talking, checking in with them, making sure that they have the things that they need, they have the support that they need, but then also talking about the Hue, and then the last half hour was just focused on politicization and consciousness making of these young people. And so a lot of them, started with the Hue, and when you talk to them today, many of them will say that was the first introduction to building health communities. But then they really learned about the ways that they could make the change today. They're not the leaders of tomorrow, they're the leaders of today in so many ways. And so they learned how they could use their voices to really raise consciousness around the issues that they were facing that they thought were just typical, it was just normal for these things to happen in their community, and they learned a lot more about how this wasn't happening in Palm Springs or Indian Wells, but these are the conditions that they were living with. And so it was through that process that a lot of them got engaged in our youth organizing work. And when you start engaging young people, you notice that their parents come, and you notice that their aunts and uncles come, and that there's so much more support for young people when they come out as change agents. And so we really were able to engage a lot more adults by engaging young people. And so I thought that was an amazing strategy that actually turned out better than we thought it was. In their communities, sometimes they tell themselves stories about that maybe they try and normalize it, but for the most part, a lot of them can pick it up naturally, and I think it's because their intuition hasn't been beat out of them yet. And so that's why, a lot of them are raising their voices about things that they don't see as just. I mean, sometimes you probably see it in your own families with your own kids, right? But after communities and also our ability to actually speak up about them. Young people have this naturally. And so when you give them the space, a safe space, to tell their truth, many of them will not hesitate to tell you very clearly what it is. And so creating those spaces are just so very important, and we see that at Sisterhood Rising. Sisterhood Rising actually developed because young people found their own voices and said, it is not okay for You Foundation to be about equity and not to have opportunities for young women as well. While we had a voice camp that had already run for 2 years, we heard from young people, young women in our sites that said, when are you going to do something for young women? It's not okay for the men to go off while the women mind the store. And so, you know, with my colleague Jenny Chen, who's sitting there in the back, the two of us really lifted up the voices of these young people and said, we need to do something about this. If we don't do something, they're going to organize against us, and it's going to be very public, and it's going to be very ugly. And so what are we going to do about this? And so, the endowment said yes. I mean, our most impactful work has been driven by young people, by their voices. Our school to prison work has all been driven by young people. The discipline work, we weren't even aware of until they brought it to our attention. And so, similarly, Sisterhood Rising really grew out of that spirit of listening to young people and really trying to address their needs. It's completely shifted over the past 4 years, where I feel like in this last year, I feel like we've gotten it better. I see Evelyn in the back who helps us on Sisterhood Rising. This year she was at the planning table, and we also brought in young people to play leadership roles in the camp. And it was amazing. It was amazing to see them own their truths, own their leadership, own their power in ways that no one could really deny. And I think it probably was the best one ever. We had the least problems ever. And young people respect one another. They really do show a lot more respect when young people is in front, really trying to command attention. It's really amazing the kind of response that they get from their peers, rather than it's one of us, up there trying to do the same. And we got a lot of young people that told us, this was the best because you gave us space to process, you gave us space to step into leadership, you gave us space to actually share our own skills with our fellow peers. And so we have a lot to learn from young people. One of the best things that I heard in one of the sessions was we were asking them about how could we create a statewide network of young people, of young women connecting with other women. And they said, what older women need to know is that we're ready to lead, and they just need to step aside and trust us. And so we have a lot to learn, including, being able to trust young people with their truths and allow them to really take leadership. So thank you.
Margarita, Virginia, for giving me space on the panel. It's really terrific to be here and to see all the energy in the room around this, dynamic opportunity. I think that's both behind us a little bit, but really much more in front of us. And I think at the California Endowment, we are, at a point in time where we're really getting it. And we're getting it in very deep and I think meaningful ways that hopefully will put youth organizing as what we might call internally a more evergreen, less from the storytelling side, but just a little bit on the internal baseball side. Here's a little of what happens and what needs to happen in an organization in order to take up youth organizing in a way that matters. I mean, I think we've heard these different stories all around the room, and there is something to be said about the quality of the work, that we are playing catch-up at the California Endowment with ourselves. We did not start out in building healthy community with a very explicit youth organizing or even a youth focus. We really started out with, yes, community-driven, very systems and policy focused, but I don't think at any point in the early planning, and I confess to being here in the early planning, that we really thought, what will the role of young people be in our work? And as we began the work, I think we came pretty quickly to understand that if we didn't engage young people in meaningful ways, and we didn't understand exactly what that meant at the outset, we weren't going to make very much progress. And part of that has to do with all of what we're talking about here, but also part of it has to do with the communities that we're in are very young. I mean, I think, Margarita, you would say the largest percentage of the population in Coachella is probably under 35. Average age of 25. So, I think while we understood all this demographic data, we didn't really understand the power that we needed to attend to in terms of who was in the room with us as young people. And so as we focused more on power and voice and organizing, it was about what we think, how we work, talked about issues that surfaced for us over and over again, that we really take those early, light bulbs and translate them into mere scars of how he, in the early days, worked to, cannibalize different programs in order to put together. I would say that the first thing that's very important in leadership, it seems to me you have very powerful, local efforts. Coachella, Santa Ana, almost all of our 14 places have, over time, built very powerful local organizing. But as a California endowment, as a state of California, the real power of that local effort and those local efforts will remain somewhat fragmented unless there is internal leader voice overall. So I would really hang on a little bit to the notion that you need internal leadership in order to make that happen. I think the other question, and I said it at the outset and I want to underscore it, is this notion of how to take and align all of the efforts that may be going on in your various institutions around young people that play out in different ways. And it looks different in, we say in California because we're a state that's very diverse overall, but you're funding in Kansas City and you're funding in Louisiana and you may be funding in Indian country, and does it look different in all those places? And how do you really begin to align the core elements of what powerful, high quality, high impact, high levels of leadership development, really sustainability looks like in youth organizing? And the only way to do that, I think, is really to bring together all the various players, however they may be playing on whatever issue. If they're doing youth organizing in any way, how do we really begin to forge common assessments, common values around what does it mean to do youth organizing? What does the quality of the work look like? It may not just be a service provider. It may not just be, a college prep program. It really is about something much bigger, more dynamic, more power-oriented, more voice, building-oriented. But I think organizations internally really have to come together to pull those elements, to be forceful and powerful. Of course, we have to listen, and I think all of us have said that, and I think in the world of young people, well, in the world of everybody, we need to listen. But I think those of us, and I feel like I'm the oldest of the old people in this room, that we need to listen a lot, because there are ways of working, there are methods of engaging that we may not be familiar with. And I was just thinking, because one of the young men over here at this table asked Luis, how long are you going to be in it for, right? And, Luis said he's 43. 43 is in my rearview mirror, okay? But I just want to say, we're in it for a lifetime.
That's right.
We're in it for our lifetime. And the value for you, and this is related to listening, is you need to help us, okay? Let's say I'm the old person in the room. Figure out what our roles are as time goes on. Because we're not leaving. We want to be in it. We will be in it. But what is our right role? And I think that's part of the listening process. And in the California Endowment, I think we took listening very, very seriously. And we went out, and I don't know if Albert mentioned this, and did a whole array of stakeholder interviews, assessments, and we focused on young people. Tell us, you know, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? How can we work better? And we learned a lot from that process as well. We also learned, you know, that in the listening arena, that there was something very unique and special going on in community, which had to do with healing, we've talked about, had to do with bringing a notion of spirituality into our practice, that we were not, you know, doing organizing in the same old way, and that young people were telling us something about how the nature of work, like I grew up and I was a union organizer, and that had very little spirituality in it, but I just, you know, think we had to learn something different, and we had to learn how to incorporate that into how we were funding and what we were supporting and what we gave people room to do. And I think there was some risk-taking in there. I do think there's a deeper conversation, Albert, about how do we fund, particularly in the world where politics and campaigning comes so close to the line, and internally we have looked, and we're a health foundation, so we're limited in some ways by our mission, looking at how can we do more general operating support, how can we do more what we call specific project grants that enable organizations to have more flexibility in what they do. So we're very intentional about how do we create more room for the organizations on the ground and across the state to be active and to be moving forward. So we're not holding them back. So I think that's an important conversation, probably on another agenda for us. But so listening, addressing these new qualities of organizing that really have to be built into the work, and working with some of the intermediaries like Open Strategy, Policy Link, you know, the ones that we have been funding as anchor organizations, to also understand this new way of organizing, because I think intermediaries often don't have those skills either, and how do we really build them up as well? I think the other important element for us is how do we link the boots on the ground, which are essential. And I think if there's no other message here, we need to commit to young people being grounded in organizations that are in proximity to them. They cannot just say, oh, there's some statewide group and, you know, I'll join up with them and maybe they'll show up in my neighborhood someday. No, we have to be very grounded in that local work. But at the same time, we want to be strategically opportunistic so that those local groups on the ground can jump into something when it shows itself. And Luis highlighted whether it was LCFF in California, Prop 47, school to prison work. I mean, there are many issues, and I think, you know, the question is how many on-ramps will there be for young people? Because we know, and I think many of us paid attention to what happened at Standing Rock this last year, that was catalytic for many young people. And that is really about sovereignty, environment, power, you know, the big guys against the little guys. How do we capture some of that energy and not create these little boxes where, oh, you can only participate if you're interested in the school to prison pipeline, otherwise there's no place for you to play. And I think that's probably not a good plan in terms of really energizing the youth organizing world. Also, I'm almost done. And I think and I know Mary Lou's in the back, I think she's still there, I can't see her, but we've really been working to understand and invest in social media, even though we know social media doesn't represent boots on the ground always. It's a different community. And how do we really adapt our work so that we can take advantage of that enormous community while recognizing the value of, you know, proximity in place and relationship to state opportunity and other events. I think lastly, and I think the most important thing that we have learned is the value of networking, of exposure, of bringing people together from different communities, from different experiences. Many young people don't leave their neighborhood. I live in San Francisco, and many of the young people I know, if they live in the Bayview Hunters Point, they never go to the Mission District. And so we bring people together and so that they can learn from one another, and become really, powerful partners and see their mutuality, see what they have in terms of their shared interests, shared values, shared experiences. So all of the, whether it's camp, whether it's Sacramento, whether it's regional activities, these are things that represent bedrock networks that are there for a lifetime. They form relationships, I think, that are there for a lifetime and can really address some of the colonizing experience has imposed these barriers between one another, and as people get to know each other, those barriers begin to fall. So I think that has become a very important hallmark of our work at the endowment. And let me stop there, and hopefully we'll have some great questions and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Marion, and we're going to open it up to questions here in a moment, but being nimble and adaptive, I want to actually invite our president and CEO, Dr. Ross, who was able to join a few minutes ago, just to kind of give us a few kind of brief comments and remarks. So Dr. Ross, as you're making your way up, I'll kind of bring context in. So this morning we had an opening circle, history of youth organizing, and then we kind of lifted the hood here to kind of talk about our internal strategy. So before I hand the mic off, I just want to say that it's, an incredible privilege to work, for the California Endowment with Dr. Ross. We really, as a staff and as a team, I think, kind of shoulder this real expectation around being bold in how we think about health. Dr. Ross, please.
I'll be really quick. Number one, because I don't want to disrupt the flow. And secondly, I'm on break from jury duty. The thing is like, you can't be a champion for civic engagement and then try to get out of jury duty. Try to do this with joy, and great to see members of my team up here. I've left me as a crying, troubled child, begging her not to leave. She came back. Good to see you. So quickly from the executive perspective in philanthropy, I think this work in our 7 years, we're now 7 years into a 10-year journey of building healthy communities. This work has been the game changer for us. It's been the most powerful investment and set of investments we've made. I think for us, we're on a journey, I'm on a journey of we've tried to make the shift from doing good for young people and graduating to through young people. Developmental opportunities and landmarks. We've already talked about schools not prisons and LCFF and school discipline. Probably these are issues that we would not have gotten into. We have a President's Youth Council. In fact, we're meeting this weekend. We get together for 3 weekends a year. Besides, we thought about, and it's not, I mean, one way to get youth involved at even governance and strategy levels is to have doing that. When you put a 22-year-old, it's kind of throwing a young person in the deep end of the pool, and to have me outnumbered and have to hear their issues. And Veronica Tariquez, and I'll end on this, it's a triple bottom line investment. When you're investing effective, you get soldiers, funding for schools, it may be jobs, it may be that community that the young person justice and a warrior for equity and a warrior for inclusion and opportunity, right? So you get an issue benefit and you get a community benefit for that young person in a powerful way. And I would have seen this is, we'll get researchers giving us the trauma exposure. These kids, a lot of these kids are carrying a lot. Oriented in the first place, but they're still carrying a lot. Right? And say a health and wellness benefit to that young person being activated and engaged. Right? Their health and wellness is better and improved just by virtue of that. To the 3 sets of returns we get. And I'm hard pressed to think of another set of investments where you get that kind of triple bottom line. If you're thinking about doing this as a 2-year project just to see what happens, then don't do it. Just from the CEO, but I would say even from the board, that you're serious about the world they want to inhabit. And has been really stewarding our youth engagement work. Thank you, Nation. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. We're going to open it up to questions. So, Will in the back, if there are any.
Yeah, I have a question. Actually, it was on the last comment by Dr. Ross. It's around this authorizing environment. And, probably have to run, so I don't know if you have a chance to answer this, but, the challenging problems that we're grappling with and that philanthropy likes to act upon are long, difficult, deep, pernicious, systemic, and they require patience. And what have you learned about building that kind of authorizing environment for the long haul? And even after 10 years, the work is still just beginning,
Yeah, I would say the upside benefit has been when you fund youth organizing, you do have to begin for the long haul, but that doesn't mean you don't see results reasonably quickly. You can see at a school board decision, at a city council decision, affecting some in a campaign kind of form. I mean, you can see movement and results within a reasonable amount of time. And most of the grants we make, we don't see, that kind of turnaround. So it's funding organizing has that funny quality where you can get a home run like next week and you didn't see it coming. And then you could be at something funny for 7 years and you think you're not making any progress. So you just have to sort of understand that that's the beast and that's the animal. But as Marion mentioned, you fund the capacity and you fund the leadership, and a standing rock will present itself. Okay? An opportunity, I don't know if any of you from the East Coast, but there's an opportunity right now that there's a group we're working with Virginia. There's a long-standing, notorious youth prison facility in Virginia and another one in New Jersey, Williamsburg, and they're trying to get those places shut down. And so that's an opportunity that, how can you trust that if you fund the organizing, you fund the support, you fund the leadership, and an opportunity will present itself that none of us in any fancy SWOT analysis, getting Bridgespan, getting McKinsey, nobody would have seen it coming, and bang, it's there. And the young people are mobilized, and you see it. And so you just have to kind of trust that that's the way this work goes. And it's not easy bringing boards along in that. That's why you try to get a community organizer in a boardroom. That helps. Anyway, thank you.
So just a quick question. First of all, I want to say I'm just very grateful for BHC because I was born and raised in Coachella, and I hear Coachella all the time, and I'm just very happy personally. And I really feel like BHC, Coachella being chosen as a BHC site had a lot to do with that. So my question is, what is it that foundations and funders need to consider in terms of investing in places like Coachella and others that are very rural, very isolated, and there's definitely a lot of history of organizing in those places, but I feel like sometimes there's been a gap in terms of organizing. So how do you come in as a foundation and support like the activation of young people? So I guess just to wrap up my questions, first of all, why should foundations consider and really spread the love to those places that have a lot of disinvestment? And number two, what are the different dynamics that foundations should consider when investing in those places?
The Irvine Foundation as a statewide region, I'm not going to say the IE per se because of its history, but the inland region, which includes Riverside, San Bernardino, and sort of, Coachella Valley, and then also the Central Valley. And so I think for us, we're constantly trying to figure out how do we support, kind of homegrown organizations. I think through our various,
especially in rural communities. I think it's definitely important to have a landscape of just the uptake for traditional organizations like Boys and Girls Club, that are just not grassroots organizations. So like one organization I wanted to give $75,000 to, and they could only accept 30. Right? And so really working with them, partnering them with organizational development consultants and technical assistance is really important to make sure that they understand what are their options in terms of growing the organization and really thinking about fiscal sponsorship or other ways to really accept more money so that they're able to grow the organization and eventually be able to spin off on their own. But some are very interested in sort of their identity, which I totally get what Virginia was talking about in terms of being told no. I was interviewed by a youth development or youth organizing group. They interviewed me and were like, I'm not sure if we're ready to partner with you. And they wanted to understand my perspective around youth organizing before they accepted any money from the endowment. And so that was very real. It was like, wow, they really get their power and they understand what they're trying to do and what they're trying to be about too. So I think those are kind of the things that I think.
A couple of other points on why Coachella and why Central Valley, down to Orange County. And if we're serious about equity, it's so profound. And so that's part of the reason that we're so philanthropy in with us, so we're not the only ones, and really building sustained capacity for organizations so that they can continue to work. Those are the places where it is the most difficult to move local policy, in part because there's so little organizing and so little advocacy. And, not to be, too political, but I think we only need to look at the recent election to understand why those types of places need more investment, need more youth organizing, need more organizing in general in order to really move our equity agenda, both in California and nationally, forward.
This question? I was going to say, well, how do you feel about, do you think that not having two parents in a child's life is detrimental to their growth in society?
I didn't have two parents. So, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's, I don't think you're the victim of your circumstances. I think what's important is I stood up when I didn't have a social support system, so I didn't stand up for that one, but I did have a mentor. And so it really just takes one or two people in a young person's life that believes in them and that tells them that they are worth more, for them to actually believe in themselves and actually try to make something of it.
Hi, Shona from the Hill Snowden Foundation. This kind of builds on some earlier questions and comments about the light bulb moment. So I'd be curious to know, I know the initiative is a 10-year initiative, so presumably it's going to end 2020 or so. So I'm wondering, what are you thinking about the future? As we heard, long-term, patient. How are you thinking? I mean, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot, but given that the light bulb has been turned on, how are you thinking of next steps in terms of integrating youth organizing into the work of the foundation as you go on?
Am I going to be the one?
You're
Well, very insightful, and as you can imagine, we are in the process of trying to understand, really more where we. And I think that, and I really am serious. I was in the room. The youth work. That it is youth organizing into the work. I think the questions for us are more related to, are these the 14 places? Are they the right 14 places? Is this the right strategy? Should we go broader? We're in some neighborhoods. We're not necessarily even in cities. Should we think about counties or regions? Are these the right set of topics broadly cast? So I don't think the driver for us of youth power is in question. So I would say we are in it for the long term.
Yeah, and I think that feels, on the relational side of things. I think one other part that we haven't talked about in regards to our 10-year campaign is that we've built deep relationships with a lot of these folks, right? Like we've seen a lot of these young people, kind of grow into leadership in their communities, assume, with Abraham's story in Santa Ana, he started out as a young person, quickly, became an organizer and now is executive director. But there's a sense of responsibility, I think, in terms of, we've put a down payment and we've incubated in places, but what does it mean for us to hold our values around equity and really being in these places? I think that is important for us. I think one other piece that is really important for me in this kind of space is that when we started the youth work at the endowment, I was actually based in our Fresno office. And so, I had done work and lived for a long time in the Central Valley. And it was really the license that TCE provided, us at the staff level to be bold, to be innovative, to really incubate from the Central Valley. Like that's really where this strategy really kind of emanated from, was in the Valley, and we kind of took what we knew from the Bay Area and LA and were able to kind of apply some of those lessons, but really supported some of the more innovative work that has kind of emerged over the last couple of years. So I think that there's a relational aspect to this that we can't lose sight of. I think it's a down payment, but at the same time, I also think that, it's important for us to be intentional about where our resources go. And I think in that regard, it's affirming to hear, kind of Marian say on behalf of our executive team that we have to continue to put our resources where our resources are most needed. And that really is the kind of inland fishhook parts of California. There are other places, of emerging opportunity.
Just to add one other kind of strand in here, and I see that we're at our time, but we are asking ourselves, because as we're deeply embedded in 14 places, and at the same time have a statewide perspective on policy. How do we spread and scale the tremendous work on the ground in youth organizing to other communities that, right now that don't have the benefit of our resources? And I think this is it's always been a challenge in philanthropy, and it is a particular challenge for us now as we look at the future, try to understand, again, as we started, what are the qualities that we're embedding in organizations in Coachella or Santa Ana or any of those other places, and how do we export them in meaningful ways so other communities can benefit?
Thank you all. That was great. Thank you all so much. Can we give another round of applause to Virginia, Margarita, Marion, Albert, Dr. Ross for running over here at his jury duty break. So we hope that the example TCE set will help you all in lifting up your car hoods and sharing some of your strategies, your inner workings with each other as the day continues and into lunch. We are going to go to break. We're asking folks to keep it to a tight 10-minute break. We're going to come into our next, after the break, our next panel, which we think will be really engaging and interesting for you, both the intersection of some of the data and research that's really helping TCE tell their story about the intersection of youth organizing and health and might be beneficial to some of you all and being able to make that connection in your foundation. And we'll also in that panel be able to hear from some. And of course, we're at a health foundation, so we get a delicious lunch just like we had a delicious breakfast. And after lunch, we're going to do some breakout sessions, and you'll get to choose if you look at your agenda. If you want to do a sneak peek on the back of the agenda, there's the different breakout sessions that you can decide which conversation you want to dig a little deeper into. And we really feel like that'll be an engaging session for you. So thank you all so much for all the thoughtful questions. We'll take a
If folks can start moving to your seats, we're going to start again in 1 minute. Okay, I think we're ready to get started again. Folks can come find their seats. We're going to begin. Alright, please come back and find your seats. We're going to get started with our next session. Okay. Lunch is coming soon, but we have a really fabulous section for this next hour before we jump into lunch. So, young people, and we're going to hear from a few youth leaders about their experiences, and we're going to get an overview of some of the newest research of the impacts of youth organizing on individual young people. But first, I wanted to set a little bit of context. So, I started out as a youth organizer in the mid-90s. And at that time, many of us would talk about we would talk about that we're organizers, we do organizing, we're radical, we don't do service, right? And that was the approach that many of us had to youth organizing. But over the last 10 years, there's been a really substantive and significant shift in the way that youth organizers approach this work. One, I think a lot of organizers have recognized that the young people that they are working with are suffering from the same oppressive systems that they are working to fight every day. And that if they don't incorporate services, supports, academic, social service referrals, social and emotional support into their organizing work, they're not going to actually be able to support the holistic development and long-term leadership of those very young people. So there's been a pretty significant shift in the field in the last 10 years. A lot of groups have started to incorporate those academic, social and emotional, social service referrals into their work. So our 2013 field scan, which is the last really significant data that we have on this, showed that 97% of youth organizing groups were incorporating some kinds of holistic supports into their work. And that more and more of them were actually formalizing, creating formal service programs within the organizing work as well. We did a webinar as part of our Youth Corps webinars last year on how groups are incorporating those supports into their work, and we had, I think, over 200 groups that registered from across the country for that webinar. Youth organizing groups are really hungry to talk about how are they doing healing, academic support in the context of doing organizing. So the Youth Engagement Continuum is a tool that we use at FCY, individual solutions, and on the right there are more systemic solutions. And the idea is that the approaches on the right incorporate many of the best youth organizing groups, incorporating the best practices of youth development. And so we believe that a healthy ecosystem for young people ideally has all of these opportunities available. But we also believe that the combination of individual supports and systemic solutions makes youth organizing uniquely able to support the development of low-income young people and young people of color. As I heard Kimberly Crenshaw tell a group of Boys and Men of Color funders last year, we cannot mentor our way out of structural inequity. So initially when we planned this session, we thought this will be, we wanted to really focus on research, because there is some amazing new research that validates the impact that youth organizing has on individual young people, and we really wanted to share a lot of that. But then we realized that we couldn't tell this story very fully without actually hearing from the experiences of young people who have been living and doing this work. So we want to start there, and then we're going to follow that up with some of the research. So let me first introduce, we have two guests who are going to be part of a panel to have a conversation about how youth organizing has impacted their lives. So if you all want to come up and join me as they come up, let me introduce first, Jesse Chavez is a youth leader with Inland Congregations United for Change in San Bernardino. He first got involved in youth organizing at the age of 15. He's now leading an effort to stop mass incarceration that plagues his city, which is the second poorest in the country. In 2016, he ran for city council and is now the youngest ever city council person in Highland. Next, I want to introduce Tylo James. Tylo's a native of South Los Angeles and alumni of Community Coalition's youth organizing program, South Central Youth Empowered Through Action. After completing her undergraduate career at UCLA, she returned home to South Los Angeles and joined the staff of Community Coalition. She's committed to uplifting and empowering the next generation of leaders who will create a more equitable and just world for all of us. So the other thing that happened, though, is that as we were preparing for this session, Tyler actually pointed out that a lot of times we have these conversations and we invite young people and we get them to tell their stories. And we often ask them to be quite vulnerable. But we don't often do the same things for ourselves as adults, right? And so we thought, what can we do that's a little bit, and we started trying to come up with the most embarrassing things that we can make you all do. And we had some excellent ideas, but unfortunately we don't have time for all of those. But what I will ask you to do before we jump into our conversation with Jesse and Tyler is just to turn to somebody next to you. And you'll have, and we have about 4 minutes total to just talk about what was a challenge that you faced as a teenager, and what supports did you or did you not have to help you get through that. So just take about 2 minutes each, turn to somebody next to you, and have 2 minutes each to discuss this question. Okay, we can start to come back now. All right, thank you very much. I hope you got a chance to share some stories with each other. And to remind ourselves that one of the interesting things about youth is that it's an identity that we all experience. We all have some history with this, whether we remember it or not.
That what we were doing was just so we would win. And when I like gained that confidence, it kind of like, it was like this thing that I had to keep feeding. So that's why I stayed.
That's great. How about you, Jesse?
Hi. So the way I got involved, it started a long time ago, back in 2000.
I lived in the city of San Bernardino, which is like not the best city in the world, and I lived in downtown San Bernardino. So in my neighborhood, what it was, we had like a cemetery that was 100 years old, and that was our park. We had like abandoned buildings all next to us. My parents were undocumented, and they were both working nights as janitors at the offices. And I remember one night my mom was coming home and we were all in the car. Because of the cemetery, there's a lot of like homeless activity and a lot of drug usage. I guess one guy was just really high or something. He came and he assaulted our family. He pointed a gun to my sister's head and told her, told my mom to give us a car or they're gonna kill her, And so just being so young and thinking about that, it's just like, what's going on? This is my community. This is where I live. I just couldn't like fathom the idea of living there. And so my mom wanted us to, get out of that area, try to focus more on other things. So she took us to church, and I was part of the youth group. And one of the girls, she was 16 years old. She was murdered at a drive-by shooting, and she was one of our friends. And so a lot of us youth organizers, or we weren't youth organizers then. We didn't know we were yet, but a lot of us young teens were very upset at what was going on. And so we had an organizer come to our church, and he was, listening to our issues, asking us how do we feel, and we told him about, Melanie Myers, who was shot. And so we rallied. We said, let's do something about it. Let's create change in our city. And so what we did is we did this prayer vigil. We had about 600 people show up. We had all the elected officials show up, the chief of police. I think we had like the chief of fire show up as well. And we hold them accountable because that year there were 17 teenagers murdered in the city of San Bernardino, and in total the year was like 58 homicides. And so that's not what we're all about. And so we wanted to figure out how to put an end to it. And doing that whole vigil, having people listen to us, it gave us youth power. We have power at the table. We're not just some kids, living in the street or whatever. We actually have, we should have a say in what's going on. And being able to, bring the elected officials to us, gave us power, and that's why I say, who doesn't like power?
All right. So, we're talking mainly about the benefits of youth organizing for individual young people. But what I think is so important about youth organizing is that doesn't happen separate from the campaigns, right? Those things are not divided from each other. So can you give us a little bit of context of what were, as a young person, what were some of the really powerful campaigns that you worked on that really meant something to you?
For me, I worked, we did a lot of work on like Prop 30, brought money to the school board. We did a lot of work on Prop 47. We did parent engagement. We did a lot of work on restorative justice, the Section K, because personally, when I went to San Bernardino High School, there's a lot of teachers there who just wouldn't put up with kids. If I walked in and I looked tired, because it was first period, she kicked me out. She would just kick me out, and she could under Section K, the willful defiance. I could get a suspension out of class, and and she'll just keep me out of class. But it's not really, it didn't really help me at all. It just helped her because she got me out of class for being tired.
And it's particularly impactful for you.
What do you mean?
Was there a campaign or a moment that was particularly important to you as a young person?
Yeah, so Prop 47 was a really important campaign that I worked on because it didn't really affect me at all, but I heard a lot of the stories that were going on in the communities. And calling all those voters, going door to door and having those one-on-one conversations, it really, helped me understand what my community is like. And I think that's one thing I take back from organizing.
So remember that I started organizing October 2008. Obama was elected in November 2008. The Great Recession was going on, right? And so when Obama came in office, he restructured how education would be funded, and him and Arnie Duncan restructured, came up with Race to the Top funds. It was a competitive grant, K-12 public schools, and it incentivized innovation and school reform. Schools in South LA were failing. And so what we did, we used that moment and that opportunity to highlight schools in South LA. So we did an assessment, we surveyed our peers, we asked them what do they want to see in their schools, what's going on in their schools, what is their student experience like, right? And then we focused on Fremont High, John C. Fremont High in South LA. It had failed for years. Students were like not going to college. Students were failing out of school, and students were being pushed out. And so we focused on that campus because it had the greatest need. And so what we did was we held all these focus groups. We had surveys. We had these recommendations. And during that process, we had to unpack things, right? So students, the feedback was, my peers and I felt like there wasn't a lot of supportive services at our schools to keep us in schools. Teachers didn't care about our education, and there wasn't a lot of counselors. We didn't have access to our counselors as we should have, and there wasn't like mentor emotional support services that folks felt that they could access. And so what we began to do was demystify mental health. What does it mean to be mentally healthy, right? Mental and wellness, right? Wellness. And so we started to engage in conversations around like, what is mental health? What makes you feel safe? And things like that with our peers. And so for us, that caused like our own, I guess, introspection in ourselves, right? Like how do we define mental health? And how do we think about it? And so that was some level of education that we had to do and some unpacking that we had to do. And during that process, I began my own journey to self-care. Because we talked about like, how do I heal myself? How do we heal? And maybe it's not the traditional ways, right? Maybe it's not a psychiatrist, but maybe it is a restorative justice circle, or maybe it is community circles with my peers. And so during that process, we developed recommendations for John C. Fremont High School, which was restorative justice counselors, so students would be less likely to be pushed out of school. We got a community wellness clinic, which the community could have access to and the students could have access to. And we also got wraparound services to prevent folks from being pushed out of school. And so we did like a recovery plan for folks that had been pushed out. And so the idea was that Fremont would be the model. We would implement all these great things at Fremont, this innovation. We would highlight that, and then we would export it to our other South LA schools. And so that campaign was really important for me because though I didn't go to Fremont, I went to Dorsey High School. I didn't go to Fremont. I began my self journey and knowledge of self, right? And how I began to unpack my own life and my own traumas and my own experiences, right? My mentors were right there helping me, my informal mentors, right? Because their title was youth organizers. But they also gave us a level of mentorship informally. They unpacked the traumas that I faced in my childhood, in my adolescence, right? They had those tough conversations with me. We had rap groups at Community Coalition, which was sessions where we would talk to a wellness, a licensed therapist, and we would basically sit in the room and talk about whatever we wanted to talk about. And then we became structured. We talked about communication styles, we talked about lifestyles, we talked about healthy habits and things like that. And we unpacked our traumas and we healed together in that space as peers, as youth organizers, right, as student organizers. And then we also began to like shift our paradigm around how we thought about wellness and how we thought about how we took care of ourselves and the need to take care of ourselves, right? And so for me, that was a really big paradigm shift, and it was a lot of unlearning, unpacking, and learning new things. Because a lot of times I grew up in South LA. South LA, I don't know if folks know about that, but like it's gang-ridden, it's violence, it's underfunded, it's divestment, all those different conditions, right? I'm a product of the crack epidemic. So in knowing that, right, I went through different traumas, I went through displacement, I went through domestic violence, a lot of different things that I unpacked, and that having that support at Community Coalition like really gave me the strength to go through that, to process all those things and still serve my community. And so that was like one of the really greatest highlights of my experiences as a student organizer.
Jessie Tyler just talked about how the organization supported her personally. Can you talk a little bit about that as well too? In what ways did your organization support you as an individual? And are there any specific times that they really supported you?
Yeah, I got a bunch of support from the organization. Through ICU, Ceiling Congregations United for Change, I was able to do so many things that I would have never done ever, because one thing we did was we created a district-wide survey. You know, we surveyed all the seniors in the high school, and it was a student survey created by students. You know, that was something I've never heard of. I was able to go to the Underground Railroad for 1 week. I went on a tour with a bunch of African American and Latino students and understand racism out, you know, over there on the east side. And we did a lot of the Capitol visits. the Capitol visits now is just like a norm to me. It's just normal going into metal detectors, going, hey, Assemblywoman Eloise Reyes, you know. It's stuff like that. It prepared me to be a better organizer, and you know, and not just keep it to myself, being able to teach the people behind me of what's going on.
So, and both of you, so how would you say that your involvement in youth organizing has impacted you as a young adult? What are the ways that it's made the biggest difference in your life?
It kept me more informed of what's going on. I guess now I'm woke, because before, you know, I wouldn't know what was going on. I didn't care what was going on. I was just in my own little world. But now seeing what's happening in the community, I just can't sit back and do nothing, you know. For over 10 years, you know, it's always me saying, hey, elected officials, come do something, you know, we need this, we need that, we need you guys to do something. But they wouldn't do anything. They would just sit there and pass a buck, or, you know, or do something that wouldn't help us. And so I decided to run myself. I ran for election in November last year. I won, first Latino to be elected. And all of that is just through organizing. I wouldn't have been a council member if it weren't for organizing, because, you know, phone banking, canvassing, that helped me a lot. I won my race with less than $600. Wow. And all I did was call and canvass. And it's really important, you know, these little simple phone calls that we make, it really impacts a lot to the youth. And I'm sure a lot of youth out there, especially in the IE, are real proud, because a lot of us, we have, you know, myself, council member, and we have an organizer now. We have a campaign manager. You know, we're you know, building all these leaders in the community, and it's a great investment into youth organizing.
How has youth organizing impacted my life?
Yeah, how has it impacted you? What difference did it make in your life?
Well, if I'm being honest, I think that I know that it definitely transformed the trajectory of my life. I had a father who was in and out of the prison system, and he eventually got pushed into the prison industrial complex and is still there. My sister was a teenage mother. My mother was addicted to alcohol and crack. And so being surrounded by young people who could relate to me, like my organizers did, had college degrees, had done something with their lives, had experienced different things, that could expose me to different things, cared about me as an individual, helped me to build confidence in myself, build my leadership. It built trust. That intentional relationship building is like key. Someone asked yesterday on the youth panel, what is the secret sauce, right? The secret sauce. I think that it is folks who care. It's folks who genuinely care, who dedicate their lives to this, who validate people's experiences, who's committed to this work and committed to the communities that they serve, and also can stay long term, right? Because folks who, like myself, who have experienced a lot of displacement and instability in my life, and in our communities that is a common narrative too, instability, it is important to have retained staff so that they can retain relationships, right? And you're making the organization stronger, and the community stronger. And so for me, it definitely changed the trajectory of my life. Again, I was surrounded by young people who had college degrees. Like in my household, that was not a thing. They helped me to navigate the college application process. They helped me to apply for my scholarship, and got a full ride scholarship to any college I chose, and I chose UCLA. They helped me through my transition. My best friend died senior year of high school, the person that I started youth organizing with. I didn't have the tools, the language to unpack that trauma, and they helped me through that. And through my college experience, right? Like I still pull as a queer black woman, like how do I navigate this space that was not built for me? And they taught me how. They taught me how to navigate systems, right? They helped me to sustain myself at UCLA, and to graduate from UCLA. They instilled in me the importance of community, right? I already had that, but like they spoke truth to power, and so showed me how I can build power, how I can improve my community. And they also birthed like the self-care practice in me, right? So now that I can teach my younger brother to self-care and to talk about his emotions and all these different things, so that he can unpack his issues, so that he may not be pushed out into school, right, and pushed into the prison industrial complex, and he can have a different life trajectory than our older brother. And it also helped me to like spread those self-care practices like journaling, like yoga, like restorative justice and affirmative talking, right, affirmative language, all those different things to everyone that I come across. And so therefore I'm exporting those tools, those skills to everyone I come across. The youth that I work with today, my peers, right, in college or in my colleagues and in the work setting, and in my family. And then so I can begin to unlearn and relearn and shift paradigms there too. So that's how it's impacting my life.
So, can you all talk about, you talked about how it supported you up till now, the difference that it's made in your life?
I definitely want to continue to be a source for my community, to be a powerhouse for my community, and teach other people how to be powerhouses. That I am still very much committed to this work, and I am committing my life to this work.
So I have one more question. It's not one of the ones that we planned to prepare, but as you all were talking, you know, I think a lot of people have the picture of youth organizing that's just all about protest, right? That all we do is rabble-rouse. and you all are painting a very different kind of picture of what the work actually looks like that I think, I think a lot of folks don't understand. We had some researchers that looked into this. They described it. They said that many folks had a flawed mental template of what youth organizing is. That phrase stuck with me. But I think you all are correcting that in the way that you're talking about the work. And we talked about so we had this idea that in fact, youth organizing is one of the most effective ways to support the development, the holistic, healthy development of young people. You talked about what is the special sauce? Why is that? So that's the question that I wanted to sort of throw back. Is there a particular reason, you touched on it a little bit, but why do you think youth organizing is so effective at supporting the holistic development of young people?
Well, it's definitely the political education piece, right? So you're understanding your position as a young person in society, in your community, in your family, and all those different things, all these institutions or all these like systems that you're a part of. And then you have to like kind of learn like your position and then how do you want to impact it, right? You learn about systems like racism and how it impacts you, and capitalism and how that impacts you on an everyday experience and everyday life, right? And then how you can choose to change and transform those conditions, right? So it's causing you to be introspective. And it's causing you to be introspective in light of those systems, right? That are impacting you on an everyday basis. So you're building your consciousness, right? And so you're considering, it's opening up your worldview. And then there's a piece around like the supportive services that I receive, right? The academic support, the applications, helping me apply to college, the wellness and emotional support, the informal mentoring that I had. So it covered all the bases, right? Like I had the emotional support, I had the wellness, the mental health, I had the physical. We went on outings and we did different activities. We were exposed to different types of self-care tools like yoga and Tai Chi and things like that. And so it's like those wraparound services that we get, but it's also building our consciousness. So we get to like show up in spaces and think critically about how we're showing up and how we're presenting ourselves and what our end goal is, right? And so therefore, when we're always thinking about that, we're always thinking about our growth. And if we're thinking about growth in systems and all those different things, then we become impactful and we become like strong social change agents.
Why do you think youth organizing is so effective in supporting the development of young people?
I think it's important because you build leaders in your community. You start building, people to take over for what's going on into the communities. Like right now, through the whole organizing, I became the first Latino in city council, and so I'm trying to move up. I'm trying to do all these other stuff. But I'm just not going to sit there and just do it to myself. It's sharing my knowledge and everything that I got to the other the young people that are in my community, and just trying to build a community from the ground up, starting all over again.
I would also add that, like, in other like service-based projects versus youth organizing, it's like self-serving, right? Or it might infuse like a community aspect to it, but community organizing is rooted in community. It's rooted in each one teach one, and it's rooted in like giving back, right? And so when we give back, and we're built into these social change agents, right? We become these vibrant people. We're giving back, and then like the results are tenfold, right? The benefits are tenfold, because it's not just, like I said, it's not just the investment that was made in me, but look how the investment that my mentors gave to me, I'm giving to other young people, right? And so I'm reaching other young people, and it's just like a ripple effect.
Bars represent a representative sample of young people. The orangey brown bars represent young people who had been through youth. And what we see, for example, is that on average, a low-income young person in California had a 6% likelihood of going to other UC. However, the likelihood of an alumni of a youth organizing group going to a UC or other select to some degree confirmed, what I had seen on the ground, because I'd been around youth organizing groups for about 20 years, and I had come across all of these young people who came from really modest backgrounds and who I knew struggled in high school. So, in a book published by Harvard Education Press, that really looks at youth organizing as quality learning time. We really wanted to delve deeper into, and really one of the things that we found was that youth organizing develops academic skills, such as I think both Tyler and Jesse talked about, through sometimes developing press briefings, through sometimes writing material about a campus world. I've interviewed a lot of young people who have told me, I learn about things in my youth organizing group that I don't learn about. This matters. Why it's important for me to understand how to properly calculate a percentage. How to measure things properly. Grade. Rarely went to class. Was really in detention quite often to be stronger and open my eyes to more than what's in front of my face. So it's pretty much the root of me writing. So now it makes me want to write, to be able to see all of the things through experience young people, to find their voice through writing and through poetry. Another relevant mentoring and academic support that Tyler talked about. So we interviewed a young woman from Inner City Struggle, alumni of Inner City Struggle, and college counselor there was one college counselor for the entire campus. United Students provided that additional support that I needed. I invested in trying to help young people figure out a pathway after high school. And one of the things that's really important is that the young college, because many of these young people don't have their first generation college students. Their parents didn't go to college. Through youth organizing, many young people come to learn about education as a social justice issue. So, and figure out, what got young people to college. On average, many of the young people who had a positive intervention such would help them move beyond their economic circumstances and perhaps take their parents with them into a better neighborhood. Education is about coming back to the community. It's not just about getting a college degree from themselves so they can no longer be poor. It's about having alumni come back to their own communities. They become teachers, they become social workers, they become labor leaders, they become information and networks and resources back to their community. So, remain civically engaged after they leave high school. And so, in my research, I wanted civically engaged young people, and these are leaders of student government. And so, leaders of student government, anybody here as you know, a lot of the leadership students are go-getters, they're generally A students, they're really engaged, the alumni of student leadership to the civic engagement of young people who were involved in youth organizing as adults when compared to alumni of student government. But the numbers of organizing groups, and what we found was that the young people who had gone through youth organizing were not just volunteering or efforts in their own communities. So as college students, maybe they were involved in helping diversify the faculty of universities and colleges, or even while they were in college, they were going back into their communities and so I think the DREAM movement, the undocumented. So in my research, I've done both state surveys that are statewide, and also I conducted a national audit of undocumented youth. And we found that young people who were involved in the DREAM movement disproportionately. So youth organizing helped build a national movement for social justice. I think here in California, political or more organizing, more activist-based, I guess the challenge systems. However, civic and organizing experience in high school. Moreover, those who came out of youth organizing were actually leading the movement. Former President Obama, and on the right is Justino Mora, who learned how to organize in high school as part of Cheerless Wise Up group. Your packets, because I don't think many of you are going to be able to read the writing up here. So this is data I cut of the Building Healthy Communities initiative. I and a team of youth researchers collected nearly 1,400 states. We had a 92% response rate because many of the young people on the research team. So what I see here is that through the Building Healthy Communities initiative, California is starting to develop leadership development. To varying degrees, we see young people developing basic skills, such as learning how to communicate with others. They're acquiring a critical civics education in which young people are learning how to analyze the social problems of their communities, members for the problems they see around them. Instead, they understand the political, economic, and larger social college going rates and so forth. To varying degrees, they're developing the capacity for civic action, so to varying degrees, they're developing strategies to support their own personal growth and well-being, including learning how to take. What this chart shows is that a lot of young people are reporting a lot of personal growth. So these are the red bars. A lot of personal growth, action, and personal growth and well-being. But analysis that I actually don't show here starts to identify leadership development. And what I found is really important, that makes a difference, first of all, is leadership of young people over the course of preferably over a year. Because over this time period, young people develop some of those basic civic skills. As time goes by, they also develop their critical analysis of social policing and not enough after-school programs. They can also understand the various challenges that African Americans, Latinos, know how to articulate an inclusive call for social justice. So what we have seen here in California develop over the last several years is kind of gender identity and LGBTQ identity to kind of figure out how to create inclusive campaigns. The other thing that really matters a lot is actually engaging young people in various parts of the groups that help young people organize the actions, the groups that help identify the campaign goals tend to produce. Some groups have developed strategies for healing and well-being. They hold healing circles. They include mindfulness of themselves. It also gives them skills to train other people on how to take care of each other. And so this is something fairly new that we did not do self-care and healing, that I think some groups around the table, I think like MILPA, Fathers and Families, are really bringing into the long term. So I'm going to conclude with that because I know we're going to also talk about the 51 important campaign victories and milestones that BHC groups can claim over the last couple of years, 51 billion, some of them were major. And then in 2016, YVote, which involves some of the youth organizing groups, can claim a coordinated effort that took a lot of work. And I can talk about that as well. So, thank you.
I think we have time for one or two questions. If people have one or two questions for Veronica about the data, we can do one or two.
Curious, your data is self-reported. Is there any correlative data that draws from either?
No, it's self-reported. However, I think the findings are pretty reliable and valid, in part because there were plenty of people who, in groups that really don't do as much of the healing work, who said, I'm not taking better. The results were very different. So, yes, of course, there's some desirability bias, but the fact that there was a lot of variation made me trust the original study to kind of gather, provide more conclusive evidence as well. But thank you for that question.
Is there any type of evidence that certain types of students self-select into these types of programs or organizations? Do we have any randomization?
Ask young people why they joined, and the top reason was because it's fun. Now, we had very different questions. Some of it was resume building, popularity. So the fact that youth organize, oftentimes the groups target students or are really intentional about involving students who might be the ACE, pulling out the top students.
Great, thank you, Veronica. In closing out this section, the thing that I want to say, there's also now a bunch of new data. I think folks know that social and emotional learning or 21st century skills, there's a lot of talk about how the social and emotional skills are actually the best predictors of future. That when young people leave these campaigns, the emotions that they have to deal with and manage in order to manage victories, defeats, challenges. All what I want to say is I think we're at the point now where we have the data and we have the stories that demonstrate that young people being involved in organizing income young people and young people of color. I think we have the data that shows that now, and I think there's a collective challenge for the world. And I think that's one of the big challenges that collectively we need to take on in this next time period. We have the data, we have the stories. We need to now young people that it's engagement in youth organizing that really gets the goods. So that I think will be a conversation. Folks are hungry. So we will transition to lunch. Lunch is set up right outside here. You can eat outside, you can eat in the court. Dessert is not there. And if you're like me, you want dessert. And dessert is set up in the library, and there's some young people that have been developing there in the library. So go get dessert in the library and check out the demo that is set up there. It is now a little bit behind, but let's be back here at 2:15. So we will start back here at 2:15 sharp and set up our small group discussions, which we're really excited.